So today's filming is Nedarim 64, Nedarim Samach Daled. And now we're going to turn to the part of the tractate which deals with annulling vows. There are two basic ways to go. Well, let's just talk about three ways the Talmud contemplates about annulling a vow. One is through charata, through regret, that you recited this vow in a moment of anger. You weren't in your right state of mind. So under those circumstances, if you say, I wasn't myself when I recited the vow, when I recited the vow, then we're going to say that that vow is annulled. Then there's the type of vow called a Pesach. You want to annul the vow by using what's called a Pesach. A Pesach is you took the vow, but if you had known these circumstances when you took the vow, you wouldn't have made the vow. So the Gemara is going to give us examples of that. So those are also, then you go to the Chacham, and the Chacham will annul the vow for you. So you go to the Beis Din of 3 or a Chacham of 1, and he can annul the vow. Then there's something called a nolad. A nolad is where an unexpected new circumstance arose subsequent to the vow. So then about that, there's a dispute amongst the rabbis whether or not we're going to say that that vow is valid. And that's called a nolad. Something new that you weren't expecting to arise arose. If you were expecting to arise, it's not called nolad. But if you weren't expecting to arise, then it's called nolad, and that's a dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim in our Mishnah. So Salk Da'il Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Postim Adam B'Chavod Aviv Imo. Rabbi Eliezer says, okay, we had said that one of the ways you can annul vows was through what's called a Pesach. What's a Pesach? A Pesach says, if you had known this circumstance, would you have made the vow? And so Rabbi Eliezer says you could say about the father and mother and use that as a Pesach to annul a vow. What does that mean about the father and the mother? The Ran offers two explanations. The Ran says that you could say to the person, if you had only known that your father and mother will be so upset that you are making these vows, that nobody wants their son to be making vows. If you had known that your father and mother will be so upset, would you have still made the vow? And he says, no. So then you could annul the vow. The Ran offers a second explanation. If you would know that people will be going around in the marketplace and saying, the only reason why you make these vows is because your parents taught you, and their parents taught you to be not careful about vows, that would also be a way to annul. That's also a way to annul the vow. So Rabbi Eliezer says you can basically use the honor to the father and mother as a way of annulling the vow. The Chachamim say it's no good. You can't use that technique as a way of annulling the vow. Amar Rabbi Tzadok, Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Tzadok says, well, if you're going to go that far as to say they could use the father and mother as a way of annulling the vow, go even one step further. You should use the honor of God as a way of annulling the vow. Meaning to say that we say to him, if you had only known that when you took this vow that you would be disrespectful to God, would you have made this vow? If you had only known that, would you have made this vow? So under those circumstances, you should say that, right? Why limit it to just if you had only known to be disrespectful to your father and mother? If you'd only known to be disrespectful to God, would you have made the vow? That's what Rabbi Tzadok says. So the Chachamim responded to him, Amrulo. So the Chachamim responded to him, Im kain ein nedarim. If that will be the case, there's no vows. So that's a cryptic statement, but the Gemara is going to offer two explanations. One is the explanation of Abaye, and one is the explanation of Rava. So we'll get to that in the Gemara. Just point out that the Yerushalmi Talmud says, even according to the opinion that says that you're allowed to use the father and mother, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, says you could use your father and mother as a way to annul a vow. Everybody agrees, even Rabbi Eliezer, that you can't use your Rebbe. If you had known this would be disrespectful to your Rebbe, would you have made the vow? You can't do that. Everybody says why? Because kvod rabcha tomorrow shemayim. Because the honor for your Rebbe is like the awe of heaven, and so it's like the same reason why you can't use the kvod hamakom, the honor for God, as a way of annulling the vow. So too, you cannot use the honor for your Rebbe as a way of annulling the vow. Modim chachamim or Rabbi Eliezer b'davar shabeino v'bein aviv v'imo sheposlo b'kvod aviv v'imo. The Rabbi Eliezer himself, the Chachamim would admit to Rabbi Eliezer, even though the Chachamim say you can't use the honor of your father and mother as a way of annulling a vow, they do, however, admit that you can use, if the vow was made about something between your father and mother and you, i.e., let's say you said you're not going to, some say means you are not going to benefit your parents. Others don't like that approach because you're obligated to support your parents. It's a mitzvah to make sure that your parents have food and clothing. So others say it means that if you say you're not going to get any benefit from your parents, then that's something that you could use as a way of annulling the vow. That's something that you could use as a way of annulling the vow. And the Gemara is also going to discuss that. Rabbi Eliezer, post from Nolad. Rabbi Eliezer also says you could use Nolad as a way of annulling the vow. What is Nolad? Nolad is a new circumstance that we had not been expecting previously arose. The Chachamim Osher. The Chachamim say you can't use Nolad as a way of annulling the vow. If it's a new circumstance, you can't use it to annul the vow. Kate said, what is this case? Amar Konem Shani Nanel Ishploni Vanasa Sofer. Let's say you say, I take a vow that I'm not going to benefit to such and such a person. I take a vow I'm not going to benefit from such and such a person, and then this person becomes a scribe. And so therefore, since he became a scribe, basically he needs him to write a mezuzah or a Torah or a cloth, or somebody just needs him to write a contract for him. He was a scribe. No. Or this person was marrying off his son. And in those days, everybody who was marrying off their child in the town, everybody came to the wedding. And now this guy wasn't expecting him to marry off his son at this time. He was expecting it to be done much later. He didn't think that the vow would prohibit him from being able to go to this wedding. He said, if I'd only known that he was going to become a scribe, or that he was going to marry off his son closely, then I wouldn't have taken this vow in the first place. What does it mean? Let's say he takes a vow now that I'm not going to enter into this house, and then let's say he takes a vow that he's not going to go into this house, and then suddenly somebody comes along and turns the house into a yeshiva, turns the house into a place where people pray. So he said that's called Nolad. He said, if I would have only known that this house should have become a synagogue, I never would have made this vow. Well, no there. So I would never have made the vow. So Rabbi Eliezer says you can use a Nolad as a way of annulling the vow. The Chachamim say you cannot use the Nolad as a way of annulling the vow. The Gemara is going to explain Nedarim. So it says that we had said that Rabbi Tzadok says that Rabbi Eliezer had said in the Mishnah that you can use the honor for your father and mother as a way of annulling a vow, and the Chachamim say you can't. Rabbi Tzadok said to Rabbi Eliezer, why you stop at the honor of your father and mother? Why don't you use the honor of God? That if you would have known that this was disrespectful to God to make vows so flippantly. So the response to Rabbi Tzadok was, if that's the case, in Nedarim, then there's no vows. Well, what does this statement mean if that's the case, there's no vows? So Amar Abaye, we're going to see two different answers. And interestingly enough, the Torah cites the answer of Abaye, even though the law is like Rav in cases of Yal Kagam. Nevertheless, the Torah Shulchan Aruch cites in Sif Yud, in Simon Reish Chav Ches, Sif Yud, it cites the opinion of Abaye, but not the opinion of Rava. So that's something that the commentaries discuss, because the law is only like Abaye in 6 cases in the Talmud and versus Rava, and this is not one of those 6 cases. So the cases of the Yal Kagam. So Amar Abaye, Imkain ein Nedarim Nitarin Yafef. Abaye says if that's the case, the vows are not going to be. No vow will ever be annulled properly. What does this mean? No vow will be annulled properly. So we have to go back. That what's the reason that Abaye is saying? Abaye is saying, we read the Ran. The Ran says the reason why we can't use God as a way of opening a vow is because if it would be the case, that would be the case that we use God, then no vow will be annulled properly, because there's no person who would be so arrogant, so chutzpahdik, so brazen, so audacious as to admit that even if he had known that God wouldn't like this, he would have made such a vow. And so therefore, even if he really would have made the vow, he was going to lie about it now. So therefore, So therefore, that's what he's saying. No vow is going to be annulled properly, because even if he really would have continued to say the vow, he won't admit it here. And so therefore, Rabbi Eliezer would admit to the Rabbanan that you can't use kvod makom. But by kvod avivim, but by the honor of his father and the mother, the rabbis prohibit it, because they say that nobody would be so brazen as to admit that he would have still made the vow, even though his parents wouldn't be happy with it. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, a person would admit it by his father and mother that he would have made the vow, even though they wouldn't be happy. He wouldn't admit it by God. And so therefore, the vows, we keep annulling the vows, but really the person would be dishonest in front of the court. Rava, on the top of Samach Daled on the base, Rava says, in Cain, Ein Nedarim Nishon L'Chacham. He says, no, Rava gives a different answer. He says, nobody is going to go to the Chacham and annul the vow. Because why? Because Rava says, if that's really the case, that you can use the Kvod HaMakom as a Pesach, and you say, I'm reading from the Ran, that you could say, well, if I would have known God would be upset, I wouldn't have made this vow, then nobody would ever take their vow and be nishal to the Chacham. Nobody would ever go to the Chacham and ask the vow, because everybody would say, listen, I can use this loophole as a way of getting out of the vow. And so, because this vow is really appropriate for all vows, and then the person will never go to the Chacham. But really, the whole concept of a vow is, yes, it can be annulled, but only by the court, because this is based upon the Gemara in Chagiga Daf Yud Amud Aleph, where it states in the pasuk, "Yachel dvaro hu yechel," but hu ain't mechal. But others, acher matir moas nidro, but others can annul his vow, and so therefore, that's what the Ran is saying. The Meiri explains that since it's appropriate to use this excuse, this Pesach, for all vows, and he'll come and he'll start asking anybody he finds to annul the vow, without really to check if this person is capable of being matir in the Nedarim. The Ritva gives a different answer. He says if you can start annulling vows like this, everybody's going to start annulling vows, and then it'll be mezalzel on the whole concept of Nedarim in the first place. And so therefore, he says, that's the reason why we say Imkain Ein Nedarim. The Rava Amar Imkain Ein Nedarim, the Shalom Chacham. Nobody's going to go to the Chacham to annul the vow. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Modin Chacham Rabbi Eliezer B'Davar Shebein Aviv V'Imo. Shepotru Rabbi Aviv V'Imo. Even though the Chacham say you're not allowed to use the honor for your father and mother as a Pesach to annul a vow, they would admit to Rabbi Eliezer that you can use if the vow is between the parents and the child. So, for example, if the child says, I'm not going to get any benefit from the parents, that you can use as a way of annulling the vow. So the Gemara says, well, Bishlam or Abaye, it makes sense according to Abaye's logic. What did we say was Abaye's logic? Abaye says that a person will be not so disrespectful as to say, nobody would admit the truth that they would have still made the vow if God would be upset, but they would say that about their father and their mother. So it makes sense according to Abaye, because he says, he says really the vows are not being annulled properly, because here in this case, because this person was so brazen and arrogant as to make a vow between himself and his father and his mother, we see he was brazen towards his parents, so he'll admit he would have made the vow even knowing his parents would be upset at him. And the Rava who says if that's the case, now what's the reasoning? Because then the vows are not going to be brought to the Chacham to ask that question. Because everybody will think I can annul it on my own. So what's the difference if the vow is made about his parents, or if the vow is made, or if he had known that his parents would be upset? And either way, he would still think that he can annul the vow on his own. Why would this case be any different? My postling. Why can he use this as a Pesach to annul the vow? So my answer is, Amri, keeping the kol nidre or sagi on the chacham, achinami potling. They would say that because since in every other case you could go, you have to go to the chacham. In this case, we would say that he'll say, okay, but this matter, this just fits in the category of going to the chacham. This is just one more case that fits under that rule. And so therefore, he's not going to apply this principle. He's going to annul on his own without going to the chacham. Okay, so now we come up to the next piece. Rabbi Eliezer says you can use noad as a way of annulling the vow. Again, we say what's noad? Noad is a new circumstance that arises, and as a result of this circumstance was not expected when you took the vow. Rabbi Eliezer says that you can use that as a way of annulling the vow, but the Chacham say you can't. My time with Rabbi Eliezer. What's the basis for Rabbi Eliezer that you can use a new circumstance that arose in the world as a way of annulling the vow? Amar Chizzi says he bases it upon Moshe Rabbeinu, based upon the verse. Amar Kar, the pasuk says, Ki meisu kol anashim, says all the men have died. And Moses was in Midian, which is where current Saudi Arabia is, and that's where Moses was with Yisro. And Hashem told Yisro, I told Moses at the burning bush, which obviously is in Midian, so obviously Har Sinai must be in Saudi Arabia today. God says to Midian, Lech shuv Mitzrayim, he says, go back to Egypt. Ki meisu kol anashim mevakshim es nafshecha. All the people who are seeking you to kill you are dead. Gemara says, V'misa denoaru. And Misa, meaning to say you couldn't go back when you made the vow, because we're going to see on the next staff, Moshe Rabbeinu made a vow that he wasn't going to go back. His father-in-law says, okay, you can marry my daughter, but make a vow that you're not going to go back to Egypt. So Moshe Rabbeinu makes the vow because those people, but now the reason why he made the vow was also because the people were trying to kill him. But now those people died. So we see from here that there was a new circumstance that arose. It was a no-odd circumstance. And yet Moshe Rabbeinu was able to annul the vow. Well, Misa the Noadu, Misa is something new that arose. From here we see that you can use Noad as a way of annulling the vow. So the Gemara says, the Rabbanan, why did the Rabbanan say you cannot use Noad as a way of annulling the vow? Because Savri Hanu Mimaisi. The Rabbanan of the position that really these people who were trying to kill Moshe, they're actually not really dead. Anu Kimaisi. These people are not actually there. Was some thought on the base towards the bottom. The Gemara explains, how could they be dead? Whenever it says Nitzim and Nitzavim, that, and it says that they were fighting, that's a reference to Dasan and Aviram, because it says Moshe Rabbeinu saw Shnei Ivrim Nitzim. It says Moshe saw two Jews fighting, and then and it says that in chapter 2, verse 13, and that was Dasan and Aviram, and it says later on, Vayifkeu es Moshe ve'Aaron Nitzavim. So how could it be that they were dead? Because we know that Dasan and Aviram were still alive. How do we know that they're still alive? Because it says, we find it later on in the in Bamidbar Chavav test, it says Asher Hutzu al Moshe ve'Aaron b'Adas Korach, and it says V'Dasan and Aviram Yatsu Nitzavim. So we see that Dasan and Aviram were still alive many years later, in the time of the rebellion of Korach. So therefore, how can we say that they had died when they were still alive? So therefore, it can't be that they were dead. So Ella Amar Shakesh Sheyardu Minachseim. It doesn't mean that they died. It means that when it says Mesu, it means that they became poor. And that is not a no-lot situation. The fact that somebody who's wealthy can lose their money, that's foreseeable. That's everybody's 1 second away from poverty. And so therefore, that was foreseeable. Sheyardu Minachseim, that they lost their money. And so therefore, it's not considered to be like a no-lot situation. And in fact, the Targum Yonasan on the verse Kimesu says, "Ezel Suvla Mitzrayim, go back, return to Egypt, because Arum Itroknin V'Nachtu Minachseon Ma'eno Chashuvan Kamasaya. He says, because those people were trying to kill you, they've lost their money and they're now considered like they're dead. And so we see from here, that they weren't actually dead, they were just poor. In fact, the Otzar Midrashim brings down that Nadav and Aviram, that Dasan and Aviram became so poor that they were standing at the gates of Egypt and they were panhandling. They were asking for charity from everybody who was walking by. And so that's what's going on here. He was considered like he was dead. The Rosh explains that the reason why that you could go back because they're poor is because now that they're poor, they lost their political influence, so power is not going to take them seriously. So the pashtus of our Gemara is when it says that all the people who are trying to kill you are dead. That is a reference to Dasan and Aviram, and he doesn't have to be afraid of Paro because the whole concern was about Nadav and Avihu to tell on him to Pharaoh. But Tosfos Maseches Avodah Zarah writes that this pasuk Kimesa Kohanashim, the intent is to Paro who died, and so therefore. And that's the pasuk that Paro has died, and that's how the Rashbam and the Even Ezra also bring it. The Gra says from the fact that it says Hamavakshim that they are the ones who are constantly seeking, not the ones who sought you. And who are the ones who are constantly seeking? That this is a reference to Dasan and Aviram. Rashi and Shemos says that Paro didn't actually die, but he got leprosy and he was slaughtering the Jewish babies and washing in their blood. Meaning to say, and that's another reference to this. So we're about to say that there are four considered like they're dead. One is who's poor, and another is the one who has leprosy, and that was Paro. Okay, then we said that even if you are very wealthy, it's not considered a no-out for you to become poor because people who are very wealthy often become very poor suddenly. It's the reversal of the fortune. Okay, so from the fact that he was poor, that's why he's called dead. And the Gemara explains this. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi kol adam she'en banim chashav kameis. He says now the Gemara often speaks in harsh language because the Gemara speaks very directly. It doesn't have time for softening things up for snowflakes like today. So the Gemara speaks directly. So some people might be insulted. We apologize for that. We'll try to understand it. It says Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Kol Adam she'en banim chashav kameis. Whoever doesn't have any children is considered like they're dead. As it says, Havili be on him, because Rachel says, bring me children. Otherwise I'm going to die. Betanya, we weren't in the Brisa, there are four that are considered like they're dead. Who are the four? The ani, the poor man, the mitzorah, the leper, the summa, the blind, and Mishain Obanim, the one who has no children. Ani, because it says, from our verse, it says all the people who tried to kill you are dead, and they're not really dead, they just became poor. The mitzorah, because it says Alniti Kames, that Aaron says about Miriam, let her not be like a dead person when she has leprosy. Suma Dechsev in Jeremiah in the book of Eichad says, B'mechashachim hoshivani, let me in the dark, Kamesei olam, like the dead of the world. Rachel says, give me children, otherwise I'm dead. What's the implication of this verse? Or Chaim Shmuel Avitz, the Mashgiach of the Amir, explains that all these people are not fully able to give. The person who's a leper is sick, he's not fully able to give to others. The poor person is limited in his ability to give tzedakah. The blind person is limited in his ability to help people. And the person who has no children is limited in his ability to give to children. So therefore, if you're not able to give, it's like you're dead. To give is to be alive. That's what Reb Chaim Shmuelevitz says. So if you want to, if these things apply to you and you want to be alive, the answer is to give. Be a giver. Anyway, so we'll stop the recording here, but we can continue in the Gemara.